Shocking! Donald Trump is now at the center of extremely harsh criticism, and the warning comes from none other than the commander himself. In surprising statements, he exposes mistakes, controversial decisions, and the direct impacts of Trump's actions, making it clear that the situation is more serious than many realize. Get ready, because you need to watch this now to understand what is really happening.
We are preparing every day. We have to be prepared for war, not for defense. We're training warriors, not defenders. We fight wars to win, not to defend. Defense is something you do all the time. It's inherently reactionary and can lead to overuse, overreach, and mission creep. War is something you do sparingly, on our own terms, and with clear aims. We fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
Hello, Bobby Jones here from Midas Touch and Valor Media Networks. I know there have been a lot of videos and a lot of commentary on the recent events in the Caribbean dealing with the United States military and Venezuela. Needless to say, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has really gotten to step into the limelight, and he's catching a lot of scrutiny. Well, I just want to give a little bit of background on a couple of things. One, the laws of war, and then two, why this is a problem, particularly for the United States military. So what I'm going to do is walk you through how we got these laws in the first place. And then by violating it, what does it say about the current state of America's armed forces? And then why people need to be held accountable for this. It seems kind of counterproductive when you really think about it. I mean, warfare is savage. It always has been, as long as human beings have fought, as soon as societies decided to take up arms against each other. And really, the beginning of the modern day laws of war started at the Hague Conventions, going all the way back to 1899. And they came again in 1907. These were the first modern treaties, mostly amongst the European nations, to try to bring a level of civility to warfare. This is where we heard for the first time, no quarters. No quarters means you cannot kill enemies who surrender or unable to fight. This was a new concept, because if you look at ancient human beings and civilizations, hey, they just killed you and took your body or parts of you back as trophies. This was a radical departure. World War I, followed by World War II, brought us to a whole new level of warfare, mechanized warfare. No one knew what to make of it. And the world had never seen devastation on the level that it had seen, specifically and particularly amongst civilians. The devastation was so bad that the world came together again. And this is where you hear the term Geneva Conventions really coming into play, because in 1949, the Geneva Conventions expanded to protect not just the warfighter, but civilians, the wounded, the sick, the shipwrecked, and the captured, i.e. the prisoners of war. This also was a new radical departure. But it was born in hard lessons learned, because in World War II, you saw shipwrecked sailors, particularly merchant mariners in the Battle of Atlantic, targeted by U-boats and killed after they were sunk. You saw hospitals and ambulances targeted as they were exiting the battlefield, where those people who were wounded were killed before they could actually get help. This was a whole new level of savagery made possible by the advent of new, more accurate and deadly weapons, such as fighter planes, more improved U-boats, etc. So the world decided we need to really get a handle on what it means to be compromised on the battlefield. These Geneva Conventions would further go on to form the backbone of international humanitarian law, to which basically all nations, to include the United States, agreed to through treaties, alliances, international law, and the U.S. War Crimes Act. So how does this translate to today? Well, every American military member is taught from the time they step foot in boot camp what it means to be a service member and what you are allowed to do and not do. First of all, you have to be able to distinguish, if possible, your combatant from civilians that may surround you, the proportionality of the force that you use. You must recognize the humanity of the combatant, meaning you should not try to have them unnecessarily suffer. That means no torture. That means treating them with a certain level of dictated respect when they become prisoners of war, etc. But most importantly, it also means the protection of the wounded, where you render aid where possible. But most importantly, you do not finish anybody off and try to kill them just because they're wounded. The United States doctrine teaches that medical personnel and anyone assisting the wounded are protected. They are not targeted. Keep that in mind as we go a little bit further. This is why what Hegseth allegedly ordered was so stunning. The double tap, meaning a second strike on the same targeted individuals who are already rendered either killed or unable to cause any potential damage, was so shocking. This is literally the textbook case that is found in the Law of Armed Conflict manual that the United States still teaches. They literally took an incident basically from World War II where shipwrecked people were shot and killed after being shipwrecked by enemy forces. They literally show you that it's a textbook example of what not to do. And for Pete Hegseth to allegedly order, quote, kill them all, whether they pose a threat or not, was the first violation. And no, this is not a war crime because the United States has not declared war on Venezuela. However, it's a violation of the international humanitarian law that I mentioned earlier, or the No Quarters Rule, or the U.S. War Crimes Act, or Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions 1 and 2. Pick one. These are all violations. And so by doing this and having it ordered, not just Hegseth should be responsible, but if true, the admiral that was told to do it, he could be held responsible. And even the person that actually pulled the trigger or allowed the ordinance to fly could be held responsible. And this is what's frustrating about the whole situation. The United States military only does what the civilian leadership of the United States military allows it to do. The constraints and restraints placed on those forces come from politically elected civilian leadership. Always has and probably always will. That being said, the civilian leadership has to put the military in positions where they do not have to make those type of calls. Hegseth has gone out of his way over the few months that he has been Secretary of Defense to erode rules of engagement, to erode the constraints and restraints of the American military. And he has even gone so far as to call rules of engagement and law of armed conflict woke because he thinks it makes the military soft. That is just mind-boggling when you really stop and think about it. Now, I just laid out for you the historical legal argument for what's wrong with the Venezuelan boat strikes, if that's what actually occurred. However, there's something much bigger than that needs to be talked about. And that's just the basic moral argument. Despite some instances in the past where America's military may have been out of pocket with how they conducted, overall, for the most part, American military members try to do the right thing. It is at the core of the U.S. military's ethos. It is why the average American joins in the first place to try to do things the right way. By doing this, this violates every major U.S. treaty that we've signed. By doing this, the troops that actually put their lives at risk are now further at risk because now they may not be given quarter. And if an actual conflict happens, it's just bad through and through. But most importantly, you're putting people who already have a hard job in situations where now they have to do the hard job and have to make hard decisions that they shouldn't even be placed into making. The United States military is being put in compromising positions by a leader who has consistently shown that he is incompetent and incapable of having the job of Secretary of Defense. If he has any shred of integrity left, he will resign as soon as he possibly can.
When we see orders like these being issued, we cannot simply look away and shake our heads. It is time to understand the gravity of what is happening. Training soldiers for war is not about creating monsters. It is about teaching discipline, strategy, and, above all, humanity within the chaos. War is not fun. It is not a display of strength. It is the most brutal reality of life. And yet, since The Hague in 1899, the world has established clear rules. The wounded, the surrendered, civilians, all must be protected. The Geneva Conventions did not arise by chance. They were born from the absolute horror of past conflicts, to limit the savagery that always existed in unrestricted wars. And now, in the 21st century, with advanced technology, drones, combat robots, and precision weapons, ignoring these rules is not just immoral, it is strategic suicide. What Bobby Jones and other experts are highlighting is alarming. If Pete Hegseth's orders are true, we are facing leadership that seems to completely forget that war is not total chaos. Ordering indiscriminate attacks, without differentiating combatants from civilians or the wounded, without considering proportionality, violates not only international conventions, but the very trust our troops place in leadership. Soldiers enter service wanting to do the right thing, fulfill missions with honor, protect lives, and act strategically. But when they are forced to follow orders that violate all of this, the consequence is not only moral, it is operational. Whoever gives such orders is putting at risk the very force they are supposed to lead. And this is not about creating unnecessary obstacles. Rules of engagement exist because war is not a video game arena. Violating them does not create advantage, it creates vulnerability. Historically, attacks on the wounded or prisoners have generated retaliation, chaos, and demoralization. World War II showed the level of savagery new weapons could cause, and it was exactly this that led to the expansion of the Geneva Conventions in 1949. Those treaties are not a formality, they are the backbone of international humanitarian law. Ignoring them sets a dangerous precedent for all future wars, including for our own troops. It puts at risk soldiers who already risk their lives every day. What we see is even more disturbing. Leaders attempting to weaken these rules, calling them woke or bureaucratic, as if ethics and responsibility were obstacles to military efficiency. This is a complete misunderstanding. Military efficiency does not mean disrespecting the law, torturing, or attacking the defenseless. Military efficiency means knowing how to use force intelligently, strategically, and with full control, ensuring that the troops are safe and able to succeed without creating additional enemies. Civilian and military leadership have an obligation to ensure that soldiers do not have to make decisions that should be entirely unnecessary. They already have a hard enough job. Adding illegitimate moral dilemmas puts lives at risk for no reason. It is also impossible to ignore the historical aspect. War has always been brutal, but there was at least a nascent understanding of limits. Ancient civilizations killed and collected trophies, but the modern history of war tried to create standards of humanity within the inevitable violence. Today, with lethal weapons and cutting-edge technology, every wrong decision amplifies the damage. Ordering double attacks or targeting individuals incapable of causing harm is not courage or strategy. It is disorder that undermines the military force itself. The American armed forces were built on an ethos of discipline, respect for the law, and moral responsibility. Any violation of these foundations is a direct attack on the integrity of the service. Moreover, there is a political and strategic consequence. If these orders are executed, we are not just violating treaties, we are providing ammunition to adversaries, justifying international criticism, and weakening alliances. We are showing that our leaders prioritize personal will over strategy and law. This puts the entire country at risk, not just in the specific conflict, but in reputation, credibility, and global security. An error of this magnitude could be exploited by any enemy, and our own soldiers could be punished or retaliated against for actions they did not choose to take. This is irresponsible military management, which must be publicly debated and held accountable. My opinion is clear. We cannot allow leadership to treat the armed forces as mere instruments of whim. We need responsible command that understands what it means to prepare soldiers to win, but always within law and ethics. Training warriors does not mean teaching unlimited savagery. It means discipline, intelligence, strategy, and above all, humanity. Any attempt to reduce rules of engagement under the pretext of efficiency or ideology is dangerous, counterproductive, and immoral. The American people deserve leaders who understand the difference between being lethal and being criminal, between strategy and incompetence. Our soldiers deserve respect, protection, and responsible leadership, not orders that put them at risk and tarnish the nation's reputation. In short, this situation forces us to reflect. True military strength is not measured only by firepower, but by the ability to use that power strategically, morally, and responsibly. Winning wars requires more than brute force. It requires discipline, intelligence, ethics, and solid leadership. And anyone who attempts to weaken these principles is endangering everyone around them, both on the battlefield and beyond. We must demand accountability, respect for international law, and commitment to human life, because that is how a strong, reliable, and respected military force is built worldwide. And that must guide every decision, every training, every action in any conflict.